Before America sent armies across oceans to defeat fascism, it had already fought wars on its own soil against the First Nations of this continent. It had broken treaties. It had taken land. It had forced children into boarding schools where their hair was cut, their names were changed, and their languages were punished. It had pushed families onto reservations, reduced ancient homelands to boundaries on federal maps, and then asked those same people to stand beneath the flag and fight. And they did. Not in small numbers. Not as a symbolic gesture. Native Americans enlisted and served in World War II at one of the highest rates of any group in the United States. From nations that had every reason to distrust Washington, tens of thousands stepped forward. Some were drafted. Many volunteered. Men and women from the Navajo, Comanche, Hopi, Choctaw, Cherokee, Crow, Creek, Sioux, Penobscot, Pima, and many other nations entered a military machine built by a country that had tried for generations to erase the very identities that now became a source of strength. This is the central paradox of the story. Why would a native man fight for a country that, in many places, still treated him as a second-class citizen? Why would he wear the uniform of a government that had massacred, relocated, and confined his ancestors? Why would he risk his life for a nation that had only made all Native American citizens in 1924, and even after that still allowed states to block or restrict Native voting rights? The answer is not simple. It is not one answer. It is a battlefield of answers. Some fought because the United States was now their country too, whether that country honored them or not. Some fought because their people had warrior traditions older than the Constitution, older than the Army, older than the word America. Some fought because the land itself was not an abstraction. The forests, plains, deserts, rivers, and mountains were ancestral ground, and if the Axis powers conquered the world, those homelands would not be spared. Some fought for wages, for travel, for escape from poverty, for adventure, for duty, for pride, for family, for treaty obligations, for the right to come home and say, "We served, now you must see us." But there is something deeper too. In many Native traditions, the warrior is not simply a man who kills. A warrior protects. A warrior carries memory. A warrior stands between danger and the people. A warrior returns, if he can, not only with victory, but with stories, songs, scars, and obligations. World War II turned that ancient role into something almost impossible to imagine. It put men raised on tribal histories inside landing craft made of steel. It put sacred songs beneath the roar of artillery. It put eagle feathers under army helmets. It put forbidden languages into radios and field telephones. It put the old world of honor, prayer, kinship, and ceremony against the cold machinery of the 20th century. Machine guns, flamethrowers, mortars, tanks, aircraft carriers, naval bombardment, and cities turned into rubble. And nowhere was that collision more violent than on the morning of June 6, 1944. D-Day. Before we step onto those beaches, remember this question, because it will follow every man in this story. What does loyalty mean when the country asking for your loyalty has not been loyal to you? Hold on to that question, because by the end of this story, when we reach Iwo Jima and the broken life of Ira Hayes, it will come back in a way that is almost unbearable. The morning opens in gray. The English Channel is rough, wet, and cold. The invasion had been delayed by bad weather, and even now the sea is not calm. It slaps against the sides of landing craft. It rises and falls beneath men who have not slept, men who have vomited into helmets, men who have checked and rechecked rifles with numb fingers. Diesel fumes cling to everything. Salt spray hits faces. The air smells of oil, canvas, sweat, wet wool, and fear. Above them, the sky is low. Clouds drag across the coast of Normandy. In the distance, the French shoreline is not a postcard. It is a wall of smoke, sand, obstacles, mines, German artillery, and interlocking fields of fire. The Allied invasion of Normandy is the largest amphibious operation of the war in Europe. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces are about to force open a front in Nazi-occupied France. The plan is enormous, mathematical, almost industrial in its complexity. Airborne divisions have dropped behind the beaches. Naval guns are pounding German positions. Engineers are assigned to blow gaps and obstacles. Infantry units are assigned exits off the sand. Timetables, tide tables, maps, radio frequencies, landing zones, beach sectors, reserve waves, medical evacuation routes. Every piece has been calculated. But on a landing craft, none of that feels like mathematics. It feels like waiting to be killed. Among the men moving toward the Normandy coast are Native Americans. Some carry rifles. Some carry radios. Some carry medical bags. Some carry languages that almost no German intelligence officer can understand. At Utah Beach, on the western edge of the American landing area, soldiers of the 4th Infantry Division approach the coast. The 4th Infantry Division is assigned to land near the Cotentin Peninsula, below the flooded lowlands that lead towards St. Mira-Glisse and eventually towards Cherbourg. The division's job is to get ashore, link up with airborne troops inland, and begin cutting across the peninsula. Inside that division are Comanche Code Talkers. Depending on the record being used, accounts describe 13 Comanche Code Talkers landing with the 4th Infantry Division on D-Day, while other public commemorations speak of 14 Comanche Code Talkers associated with the unit and its European campaigns. The broader wartime group trained for the Army's Comanche Code program included more men than the number who actually hit Utah Beach that morning. For the purpose of this story, what matters is the truth behind the numbers. Comanche soldiers were there in the invasion force, carrying one of the most unusual weapons on the beach: their language. One of the most remembered among them was Charles Chibity, a Comanche soldier from Oklahoma, assigned to the 4th Infantry Division and associated with the 22nd Infantry Regiment. He and other Comanche speakers had trained to transmit battlefield information in a code built around Comanche words and phrases. This was not simply speaking casually in their language. It was a system. Military terms were assigned Comanche equivalents: tanks, bombers, machine guns. Officers' artillery, positions, and movement orders could be sent quickly by voice over radio or telephone, then translated back into English for commanders. This mattered because radio was both lifeline and vulnerability. In World War II, battlefield communication moved through field telephones, switchboards, wire, radios, runners, and signal lamps. Wire could be cut by shell fire. Runners could be killed. Radio could be intercepted. Codes could be broken. The German army was skilled, disciplined, and experienced. If a message was sent in plain English, it could be understood. If sent in a standard code, it might take time to encipher and decipher. And under fire, time was blood. But Comanche was not a language most German cryptanalysts had studied. It was also not a language that could be solved like a simple substitution cipher in the middle of a battlefield. It had sound patterns, grammar, cultural references, and speed. A code talker could hear a message, convert it instantly into the agreed system, transmit it, and another Comanche soldier could decode it on the other end. A language once dismissed, suppressed, and treated as backward became, in Normandy, a shield. Picture the landing craft at Utah. The ramp is still up. Men are packed shoulder to shoulder. Helmets knocked together. Rifles are held high to keep them dry. A soldier can hear engines, waves, shouted orders, artillery in the distance. The German beach defenses at Utah are less murderous than those at Omaha, but no man in the boat knows that in the way historians know it now. To him, the coast ahead is a place where men disappear. When the ramp drops, the world becomes sound. Water, metal, boots, shouting, incoming fire. Men pushing forward because the men behind them are pushing too. The beach is wide and flat at low tide, broken by obstacles and churned by explosions. Engineers and infantry move through smoke. Vehicles struggle in sand. Landingkraft grind shore. The Atlantic Wall, so heavily advertised by Nazi propaganda, is not a single wall. It is a system: bunkers, strongpoints, artillery, mines, barbed wire, flooded fields, causeways, machine guns, pre-registered fire. Utah Beach has one accidental advantage. Currents push parts of the landing force south of the planned sector. That error turns out to place many men in a less heavily defended area. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., coming ashore with the 4th Division, famously decides to start the war from where they actually are rather than where the maps said they should be. But even a better landing zone is still a battlefield. The Comanche Code Talkers are not standing behind a clean desk. They are moving with infantry, headquarters elements, and signal teams. They are operating in a world where a radio can be knocked out by water, where a field telephone line can vanish under a tank tread, where a shell can erase the man who was supposed to carry the message. The Code Talker is not just a translator. He is a soldier in the communication bloodstream of the invasion. A message goes out from the beach. One remembered version associated with Charles Shibbity says the first Comanche message sent from the beach reported that the unit was 5 miles to the right of the designated area, 5 miles inland, that fighting was fierce, and that help was needed. The exact wording varies in public retellings, but the meaning is powerful. Amid the confusion of the landings, the Comanche language carried urgent tactical reality. Where are we? How bad is it? What do we need? That is what armies must know under fire. And that is what these men help transmit. Think about the poetry and the violence of that moment. A Comanche soldier, wearing the uniform of the United States Army, standing on French soil under German fire, uses a native language to coordinate the liberation of Europe. His words move through American equipment, across a battlefield planned by Allied commanders, against a Nazi army obsessed with racial hierarchy. The Germans hear sound. The Americans receive meaning. The code does not care what the boarding schools tried to erase. It lives. And yet the irony is brutal. Many native children had been punished for speaking their languages in American institutions. Some were told those languages had no place in modern life. Now modern war itself depended on them. That is the first major collision in this documentary. Not a spear against a tank, not a bow against a rifle, but memory against erasure. The same cultural survival that the United States tried to suppress became a military advantage when the country was desperate enough to recognize its value. If you're watching this and already sense that this story is bigger than battlefield heroism, stay with it. Because D-Day is only the doorway. Later, we will follow a Crow warrior into Nazi Germany as he fulfills ancient war deeds in a mechanized war. We will follow Navajo Marines through volcanic ash and jungle rot. And we will watch one of the men in the most famous war photograph in American history come home to a country that loved his image more than his pain. But first, we have to cross Omaha. Omaha Beach is different. If Utah is confusion with survivable openings, Omaha is slaughter. The beach stretches beneath bluffs, draws, and exits controlled by German strongpoints. The tidal flat is exposed. Landing craft come in under fire from artillery, mortars, and machine guns. The German MG-42 machine gun is one of the most feared weapons on the battlefield. It fires so fast that individual shots blur into a tearing sound, like canvas ripping forever. American soldiers called it Hitler's buzz saw. Its rate of fire could reach more than 1,000 rounds per minute. In a bunker behind concrete or earth, sighted to sweep a beach, it turns open sand into a killing floor. At Omaha, men of the 1st Infantry Division and 29th Infantry Division land into chaos. Many units are pushed off course. Some tanks fail to reach shore. Engineers are killed before clearing obstacles. Radios are drowned. Office NCOS take over. Men crawl because standing is suicide. Wounded soldiers lie at the waterline as the tide begins to come in. Among those men is Charles Norman Shea of the Penobscot Nation. He is 19 years old. 19. Old enough to carry morphine and bandages into the worst beach in the American sector. Young enough that, in another life, he might still be learning a trade, hunting, working, listening to elders, thinking about the future. Instead, he is a medic in the United States Army, serving with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. A combat medic's weapon is not supposed to be a rifle. His mission is to keep men alive. On a beach like Omaha, that mission becomes almost impossible. A medic carries a medical bag, bandages, sulfa powder, tourniquets, morphine syrettes, scissors, tags, and whatever courage he can gather. He listens for the sound all medics know. Medic. Sometimes shouted, sometimes screamed, sometimes whispered by a man whose lungs are filling, sometimes not spoken at all because the wounded are face down in the surf. Now imagine Shay coming ashore. The ram drops. Men rush forward. Some are hit before they can leave the boat. Some jump into water deeper than expected and sink under the weight of gear. Rifle, ammunition, pack, entrenching tool, gas mask, helmet, boots, wet uniform. The sea is not a dramatic background. It is an enemy. It drags wounded men down. It fills mouths and nostrils. It turns blood pink in the foam. The sand at Omaha is not clean. It is chopped by bullets, cratered by shells, littered with equipment, pieces of wood, metal obstacles, bodies, helmets, packs, abandoned weapons. The air is filled with the snap of rifle fire, the deeper hammer of machine guns, the cough of mortars, the heavy concussion of naval shells landing inland, and the strange small sounds of men trying to breathe. Shay sees a man in the water, then another. His job is not to win the beach by taking a bunker. His job is to reach the wounded before the tide reaches them. This is a different kind of warrior tradition, but it is still a warrior tradition. The medic goes towards suffering when every instinct says to move away. He kneels in the open. He exposes himself to fire not to kill, but to bind, drag, inject, lift, and carry. He makes decisions no 19-year-old should have to make. Who can be saved? Who is already gone? Who needs morphine? Who needs pressure on an artery? Who must be moved now before the water covers his face? Charles Shay later became known for repeatedly entering the water under fire to pull wounded soldiers from drowning. He would be awarded the Silver Star for his actions that day. But awards come later. On Omaha, there is only the next body. One of the most haunting parts of Shay's memory involved a close friend, Private Edward Moriswicks. Shay tried to save him. He could not. Imagine that as cinema, but do not make it sentimental. Make it harsh. A young medic sees a friend in the surf or on the sand. The friend is grievously wounded. Bullets are still striking around them. The medic does what training and love demand. He tries to stop the bleeding. He tries to move him. He tries to keep him alive. But the wound is too much. The beach is too loud. The sea is too close. The war does not pause because two young men know each other. That failure stayed with Shay. This is what military history often hides when it becomes arrows on a map. We say the 1st Division advanced. We say casualties were heavy. We say the beachhead was secured. But inside those phrases are moments like this. A 19-year-old Penobscot medic kneeling over a friend he cannot save while machine gun fire cuts the air above him. And here the central theme deepens. Native service in World War II was not only about killing the enemy. It was also about carrying the wounded. It was about staying human inside a machine designed to turn men into numbers. It was about men from communities that had endured grief for generations entering another landscape of grief and refusing, even there, to abandon the living. The Germans on the bluffs at Omaha used terrain brilliantly. Their fields of fire overlapped. The beach exits were covered. Mortar crews could fire into approach routes. Machine gunners could sweep the sand from protected positions. American soldiers had to cross open ground under fire, find shelter behind shingle, seawalls, obstacles, or the bodies of equipment, and then claw toward the bluffs in small groups. This is where the image of modern war becomes almost inhuman. The individual soldier is tiny. The weapons are enormous in effect. A man's courage does not stop a machine gun belt. A prayer does not stop a mortar shell. Honor does not make the sand bulletproof. But courage, prayer, and honor do something else. They make a man move anyway. Shay moved anyway. The Comanche Code Talkers at Utah transmitted anyway. Across Normandy, Native soldiers served inside a battle that was not made for old codes of honor. No enemy counted coup on Omaha. No warrior rode across a field to touch an opponent and prove bravery without killing him. There was no ritual space. There was no clean duel. The enemy was often a muzzle flash, a concrete slit, a shell from somewhere unseen, A burst from an MG-42 before the gunner's face could even be identified. And yet the old warrior ethic did not vanish. It adapted. For a Comanche Code Talker, the act of service was not less brave because it happened through a radio. For a Penobscot medic, the act of rescue was not less warrior-like because he carried bandages instead of a rifle. The ancient role survived by changing shape. This is why this story matters. It forces us to expand what we mean by warrior. A warrior can be the man who charges a machine gun nest. A warrior can also be the man who keeps speaking his language under fire. A warrior could be the medic who drags strangers out of the tide. A warrior can be the veteran who comes home and tells the truth after decades of silence. And if this story is hitting you differently than the usual World War II documentary, take a second right now to like the video, because that tells YouTube to push this history to more people. Not because the algorithm is more important than the men in this story, but because stories like this disappear when no one helps carry them forward. By the end of D-Day, the Allies have paid a terrible price, but the beachheads hold. Utah becomes a successful landing. Omaha, after hours of disaster and improvisation, is taken by men who refuse to stay pinned to the sand. The invasion does not end the war. It opens the road into France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. It begins the long western drive toward the Reich. The Comanche Code Talkers continue to serve in Europe. Their work does not end at Utah. They will be connected to campaigns beyond Normandy, including the brutal fighting in the Hurtgen Forest and the Battle of the Bulge. Their code, like the Navajo Code in the Pacific, remains part of a larger story of native languages used as military instruments. Charles Shea survives Omaha, but survival is not the same as escape. He carries the beach with him. Like many veterans, he speaks little of it for many years. Later in life, he returns to Normandy and becomes a living bridge between memory and mourning. On the beach where he once crawled through fire, he honors the dead with ceremony. A Penobscot man who had once been a 19-year-old medic becomes, in old age, a keeper of memory on foreign sand. That image is almost too powerful to ignore. An elder standing near Omaha Beach. The sea still moving. The wind still coming in. The tourists and officials and flags all around him. But beneath the ceremony is the same sand, the same tide, the same place where young men called for medics, and some never left. D-Day gives us the opening wound of this story. It shows the paradox in its rawest form. Native Americans fought for a nation that had often failed them. They used cultures that had been attacked to help save a world at war. They entered modern combat with older ideas of duty still alive inside them. But the next part of the story takes the collision even further. Because in Nazi-occupied Europe, one Crow soldier would carry war paint beneath his uniform, an eagle feather beneath his helmet, and a set of ancient requirements in his mind. He would go to war with the United States Army, but he would also go to war as a Crow warrior. And in the middle of World War II, surrounded by rifles, mines, artillery, and German soldiers, he would complete the deeds required to become a war chief. His name was Joe Medicine Crow, and his story sounds impossible until you realize that history is sometimes stranger than legend. Joe Medicine Crow was born near Lodge Grass, Montana, on the Crow Reservation. His Crow name, often translated as High Bird, tied him to a world of kinship, memory, and oral history. He grew up close to the living memory of the Plains Wars. His step-grandfather, White Man Runs Him, had been a scout connected to the Little Bighorn campaign. That meant Joe Medicine Crow did not learn the 19th century only from books. He heard history from people close enough to touch it. He was also highly educated. He studied anthropology, earned advanced academic training, and became a historian of his own people. That matters because he was not a stereotype of the warrior untouched by modernity. He was modern and traditional at once. He could move through universities and ceremonies, archives and oral histories, army formations and Crow memory. Then World War II came. Medicine Crow entered the United States Army and served with the 103rd Infantry Division, the Cactus Division. In Europe, he became a scout. That role alone carries deep resonance. Plains warfare had long valued scouts. men who could read terrain, detect movement, understand silence, and move ahead of the main body. In the U.S. Army, the scout role was mechanized and modernized, but the instincts were ancient: observe, advance, survive, report. Before going into battle, Medicine Crow carried ceremony with him. He later described wearing war paint beneath his uniform, 2 red stripes on his arms, hidden from the official eye, but not hidden from himself. He also carried a sacred eagle feather beneath his helmet, given by a medicine man. Think of that image carefully. On the outside, an American soldier in standard issue uniform, web gear, boots, steel helmet, probably carrying the weapons and equipment of an infantryman in Europe. Beneath it, red paint, a feather, prayer, identity, continuity. This is not costume. It is not decoration. It is spiritual armor. The helmet is meant to stop fragments. The feather is meant to remind the man who he is. The 103rd Infantry Division fought in the European theater after landing in France in late 1944. Its route took it through eastern France and into Germany and Austria. By then, the war in Europe had entered a phase of collapse and ferocity at the same time. German forces were retreating, but not simply surrendering. They fought from villages, forests, ridgelines, bunkers, and fortified lines. Mines and machine guns still killed. Artillery still shattered bodies. The closer Allied soldiers came to Germany itself, the more they encountered the physical and psychological edge of the Nazi state. For Medicine Crow, the war became a place where Crow traditions and modern combat overlapped in astonishing ways. To become a Crow war chief, a man traditionally had to complete 4 war deeds. He had to touch an enemy without killing him, often called counting coup. He had to take an enemy's weapon. He had to lead a successful war party. And he had to steal an enemy's horse. In the age of tanks and trucks, the last requirement should have belonged to another century. But Europe in 1944 and 1945 was not purely mechanized. Armies still used horses. German forces, including units connected to the SS and rear area formations, relied heavily on horse transport, especially as fuel shortages worsened. The Nazi war machine had tanks and propaganda reels, but also had horses pulling guns, wagons, supplies, and men through mud. This mattered because Joe Medicine Crow would find horses in the heart of Hitler's Europe. One of his war deeds came in close combat. As the story is often told, he turned a corner and found himself face to face with a young German soldier. This is the nightmare version of infantry fighting. No heroic charge across an open plain. No distant target. Just sudden contact at human distance. A corner. A breath. A weapon. A decision. Medicine Crow moved first. The 2 men collided. He overpowered the German, took his weapon, and had the chance to kill him. But when the German cried out, calling for his mother, Medicine Crow spared him. That detail is the heart of the scene. In industrial war, the enemy is often reduced to a uniform. But at arm's length, he becomes a person again. A young man, terrified, invoking his mother. Medicine Crow had completed the deed of touching an enemy and taking a weapon, but he did not need to kill to prove courage. In the older warrior code, counting coup could carry more honor than killing because it demonstrated mastery over fear and over the enemy without requiring death. Now place that inside World War II. Around them, artillery is turning towns into broken stone. Nations are mobilized for annihilation. The Nazi regime is committing genocide across Europe. And in one sudden encounter, a Crow soldier makes a choice rooted in a warrior ethic older than the battlefield around him. He spares the man. Another deed involved leading a successful war party. In modern army terms, this was not a tribal raid. It was a combat action. Medicine Crow led a small group under dangerous conditions to accomplish a mission, often described in retellings as retrieving explosives or moving against German positions. The language changes depending on who tells it. War party in Crow memory, patrol, or squad action in Army language. But the meaning overlaps. He led men into danger and brought the mission through. Then comes the horses. This is the scene that belongs in the center of the documentary. Late in the war, somewhere in Germany, Medicine Crow and other soldiers came upon a group of horses connected in accounts to German or SS personnel. The old requirement stood before him in living form, not a metaphor, not a museum memory. Actual horses breathing in cold European air, tied to the enemy's military world. He took them. Accounts say he stole around 50 horses from a German camp or farm area and rode away, singing a Crow honor song. Think of the collision in that image. A Crow soldier in U.S. Army service, in the ruins of Nazi Germany, taking horses from the enemy and singing a traditional song as he rides. Behind him, the 20th century is burning. Artillery, diesel engines, radios, collapsing fronts, prison camps, shattered towns. Beneath him, the oldest symbol of Plains mobility and warrior prestige is alive again. The horse, in Crow history, was not just transportation. It was wealth, power, status, beauty, and freedom. To steal horses from an enemy was not theft in the small sense. It was proof of daring. It was a public act of courage. It said, I entered the enemy's space, took what mattered, and returned. In Germany, against the army of a regime that believed in racial domination, Joe Medicine Crow completed a deed from a tradition that Nazis would never have understood. And that is why his story feels almost mythic. But it is not myth in the sense of being false. It is myth in the deeper sense. A true event that carries symbolic weight larger than itself. The United States Army saw a scout. The Crow Nation saw a warrior completing the path to becoming a war chief. The Germans saw, if they saw anything at all, an enemy soldier taking horses. History sees all three layers at once. This is what the documentary must make the audience feel. Native soldiers were not simply absorbed into the U.S. military. They carried nations within them. And if you want more stories like this, stories where the familiar version of World War II suddenly opens into something deeper, subscribe now. Because the algorithm usually rewards the same recycled battles. This channel is here for the stories hiding underneath them. Joe Medicine Crow's story gives us the poetic extreme of the theme. But he was not the only Native soldier whose battlefield actions forced the modern war machine to confront individual courage at close range. In Italy, another Native American soldier crawled through pain, terrain, and machine gun fire to do what military manuals describe in dry language, but men experience as terror. His name was Ernest Childers. Ernest Chief Childers was a Muskogee Creek soldier from Oklahoma. He served in the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbird Division, a National Guard division with deep ties to Oklahoma and the Southwest. The division's shoulder patch, the Thunderbird, itself carried Native symbolism, though the unit included men of many backgrounds. During World War II, the 45th fought through Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. Its men saw mountain warfare, river crossings, urban fighting, and the slow, bloody grind against German defensive positions. On September 22, 1943, near Oliveto, Italy, Childers performed the actions that earned him the Medal of Honor. The Italian campaign was not the easy side road some people imagine. It was a brutal struggle through mountains, ridges, stone villages, river valleys, vineyards, olive groves, and terrace ground. German defenders understood terrain. They placed machine guns to cover approaches. They used stone houses as firing points. They turned ridgelines into traps. Advancing uphill against prepared positions is one of the worst jobs in infantry combat. Gravity helps the defender. Visibility helps the defender. The attacker exposes himself step by step. Childers had already suffered a fractured instep. In simple terms, his foot was injured badly enough that every movement hurt. But he continued forward with 8 enlisted men toward enemy machine gun nests on a hill. Imagine the physical reality. The ground is uneven. Italy is not a flat training range. There are rocks, walls, fields, ditches, trees, and stone buildings. A man with a damaged foot cannot sprint cleanly. He cannot shift weight normally. Every step sends pain upward through the leg. Now, at enemy fire, add the sound of bullets cutting into rock. Add the knowledge that the machine gun ahead is not frightened by your bravery. It will keep firing until someone silences it. Childers and his men advanced to a rock wall overlooking a cornfield. He ordered a base of fire across the field so that he could maneuver. That phrase, base of fire, sounds technical. In reality, it means some men shoot to keep the enemy's head down while another man moves close enough to kill or capture the enemy. It is teamwork under lethal pressure. It is also trust. The man moving must trust that the men firing will keep firing. The men firing must trust that the man moving will not waste their risk. Childers advanced. When two enemy snipers fired from a nearby house, he killed both. Then he moved behind a machine gun nest and killed the occupants of the nearer position. He continued toward a second nest. In one of the most striking details of the citation, he threw rocks into it. Rocks. In a war of artillery and automatic weapons, a wounded officer used the terrain itself, used whatever was available to force a reaction. When the two men inside rose up, he shot one, and another was killed by one of his men. Then Childers continued to a house farther up the hill and captured an enemy mortar observer. This is not cinematic because it is flashy. It is cinematic because it is brutally concrete. A fractured foot, a rock wall, a cornfield, snipers in a house, machine gun nests, rocks thrown into a position, a man moving uphill because the attack depends on someone moving uphill. Childers became the first Native American to receive the Medal of Honor for Actions in World War II. But the medal language, formal and polished, cannot fully hold the moment. It cannot convey the breath in his throat, the pain in his foot, the grit under his hands, the way machine gun fire makes the body want to flatten itself into the earth. A medal records what happened. It does not record what fear felt like. That is why we tell it this way. Because history becomes honest only when it returns the body to the battlefield. Another Native-associated Medal of Honor recipient, Van T. Barfoot, also fought with the 45th Infantry Division. Near Carano, Italy, on May 23, 1944, Barfoot, then a technical sergeant, moved alone against German positions on commanding ground. He crawled toward a machine gun nest, destroyed it with a hand grenade, moved along the defensive line with a Thompson submachine gun, killed and captured enemy soldiers, and eventually captured 17 prisoners. Later that day, he exposed himself to enemy tanks and helped wounded men back to safety. Barfoot's story reinforces the tactical pattern. The battlefield is not won only by mass. It is often cracked open by a single man using ground, timing, nerve, and violence at close range. Crawling to a flank. Getting near enough for a grenade. Moving before the enemy can reorient. Turning a fixed position into a trap for the defender. Childers and Barfoot were not fighting in a romantic war. They were fighting in mud, rock, smoke, and fear. But their actions belong beside older warrior values because they required the same core qualities: courage, self-command, responsibility to the group, and the willingness to move first. So by the time the war reaches its middle chapters, we can see the pattern clearly. At Normandy, native languages and native medics helped men survive the opening of the Western Front. In Germany, Joe Medicine Crow carried an ancient warrior path into the heart of mechanized war. In Italy, native soldiers attacked machine gun positions with broken bones, grenades, rifles, and whatever the terrain gave them. But across the world, in the Pacific, the story would become even more secretive, more linguistically brilliant, and more psychologically punishing. Because there, the United States Marine Corps turned the Navajo language into one of the most effective battlefield codes in military history. To understand the Navajo Code Talkers, you have to understand the problem they solved. The Pacific War was fought across distance: ocean, island, jungle, reef, volcanic ash, coral, caves, and heat. Communication was life. Marines landing on an island needed to coordinate artillery, naval gunfire, air support, supply, evacuation, and movement. A message delayed by minutes could mean men walking into machine gun fire. A message misunderstood could mean shells landing on friendly troops. A message intercepted could reveal an attack before it began. Japanese intelligence had skilled code breakers. Standard codes could be slow. Mechanical encryption was not always practical in frontline chaos. What commanders needed was speed and security at the same time. The Navajo language offered both. But the code was not simply ordinary Navajo conversation. That is one of the common misunderstandings. The original group of Navajo Marine recruits, often remembered as the First 29, helped develop a formal code at Camp Elliott in California in 1942. They created a vocabulary in which Navajo words from nature, daily life, animals, and objects were assigned military meanings. A fighter plane became a hummingbird. A dive bomber became a chicken hawk. A tank became a turtle. A destroyer could be described through a shark. A submarine became an iron fish. A battleship became a whale. A commanding officer could be rendered through a war chief. The code also included an alphabet system, using Navajo words to represent English letters, allowing names and unusual terms to be spelled out. This was linguistic engineering under military pressure. The genius was that even if a Japanese listener somehow knew Navajo, which was already extremely unlikely, he would still not automatically understand the code. Hearing the Navajo word for turtle would not tell him that Marines meant tank unless he knew the code book. Hearing chicken hawk would not reveal dive bomber without the assigned meaning. The system had two layers: an indigenous language unfamiliar to the enemy, and a coded vocabulary within that language. Now imagine a Navajo code talker in combat. He is not sitting in a clean radio room. He is on an island where the ground may be coral sharp enough to cut boots, or jungle mud thick enough to rot skin, or volcanic ash that absorbs blood like black flour. He may be crouched in a foxhole with a radio handset pressed to his ear while shells land nearby. He may be running wire under fire. He may be beside a command post as officers shout coordinates and units shift under pressure. He must listen, convert, speak, receive, decode, and stay calm while the world is exploding. The code must move faster than fear. In the Pacific, the Navajo code talkers serve in major marine campaigns, including Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam, Polilliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The geography itself was hostile. Heat, mosquitoes, oat, salt, coral, caves, zen, the smell of bodies that could not be recovered. Japanese defenders often fought from concealed positions, bunkers, tunnels, and mutually supporting caves. On islands like Polilliu and Iwo Jima, the enemy did not simply defend a beach. They turned the island into a fortress beneath the ground. Polilliu, in September 1944, was supposed by some planners to be taken quickly. Instead, it became one of the most savage battles of the Pacific. Marines faced heat so intense that thirst became a form of torment. The coral ridges tore skin and uniforms. Japanese positions in the Immerbergal Mountains, a maze of ridges, caves, and ravines, forced Marines into close-range killing. Flamethrowers, satchel charges, grenades, artillery, and small arms all converged in terrain that looked less like an island and more like broken teeth. A code talker in that environment was not just a communicator. He was a target, a Marine, and a keeper of a secret. Then came Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was volcanic, black, and exposed. Mount Suribachi rose at the southern end like a watching eye. The beaches were made of soft volcanic ash that swallowed boots and bogged down vehicles. Marines landing there found that digging foxholes was almost useless. The ash collapsed back in. Japanese defenders under General Tadamaki Kurobaishi had built an underground defensive network of caves, tunnels, bunkers, and concealed firing positions. The island had been prepared not for a glorious banzai charge, but for attrition. The defenders would wait, survive bombardment, and kill from cover. When the Marines came ashore on February 19, 1945, the island seemed at first strangely quiet. Then the Japanese opened fire. Mortars, artillery, machine guns, rockets, interlocking fire from hidden positions. Men were hid on the beaches. Equipment piled up. The black sand became a trap. The smell of sulfur mixed with explosives and blood. In that chaos, Navajo code talkers transmitted hundreds of messages. One famous account credits 6 Navajo code talkers with working around the clock during the first 2 days of Iwo Jima, sending and receiving more than 800 messages without error. Major Howard Connor, the 5th Marine Division signal officer, later made the powerful statement that without the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. Whether quoted in a ceremony, a history, or a congressional record, the meaning is clear. Commanders understood their value. But value can become burden. The Code Talkers carried a secret that was bigger than themselves. Their work remained classified for years after the war. They came home unable to fully explain what they had done. Imagine surviving the Pacific, returning to your community, and not being able to say, in detail, how your language helped move divisions, call artillery, direct supplies, and save lives. There is also a darker story often told about them. That Code Talkers had bodyguards with secret orders to kill them if capture was imminent to protect the code. This point must be handled carefully. Some veterans and later accounts repeated versions of this claim, and it became famous in popular culture. Other historians and cryptologic authorities have stated that there is no solid evidence of a formal, universal military policy ordering bodyguards to execute Code Talkers. The truth may live in the fog between official records, frontline rumor, individual fear, and the extreme value placed on the code. But even as a rumor, it reveals something psychologically real. The Code Talkers knew they carried something the enemy could not have. They knew capture by Japanese forces could mean torture, interrogation, and death. They knew their language, their mind, their memory, and their voice were military assets. That is a heavy thing to carry in a foxhole. And think again of the historical irony. The United States had tried to suppress native languages in boarding schools. Children had been punished for speaking the words of their grandparents. Then, in the Pacific, the survival of those words became a matter of national security. A language treated as an obstacle to assimilation became an instrument the enemy could not break. That is not just irony. It is indictment. Because the country did not suddenly honor those languages out of moral awakening. It used them because it needed them. And still, the men served. That is the complexity. That is why this story cannot be told as simple patriotism or simple betrayal. It is both and more than both. Native Code Talkers fought for the United States, for their fellow Marines, for their tribal nations, for their families, and for a future in which their people might be impossible to ignore. If you're still watching, comment the word remember below. Not for a gimmick, but because remembrance is an action. Every comment tells the platform that these men are not side characters in American history. They are central to it. The Navajo Code Talkers were not alone. Other native languages have been used in military communication, including Choctaw in World War I and Comanche, Hopi, Meskwaki, Chippewa, Oneida, Sioux, and others across the world wars. But the Navajo program became the largest and most famous, especially in the Pacific, because of its scale, sophistication, and combat record. Its power came from more than vocabulary. It came from memory discipline. Code Talkers had to memorize the code. They could not rely on carrying a code book into combat where it might be captured. They had to be fast enough for battle and accurate enough for artillery. They had to function under shell fire, fatigue, heat, dehydration, and grief. A single wrong coordinate could kill Marines. A misunderstood unit designation could shift fire to the wrong ridge. A delayed request could leave a company without ammunition. The Code Talker's voice became a bridge between chaos and command. Imagine one of them at Iwo Jima. He is crouched low. The handset is slick with sweat and grime. Around him, Marines are yelling for corpsmen, water, ammunition, flamethrowers, stretchers. The ground trembles with naval gunfire. Somewhere ahead, a Japanese machine gun opens from a cave mouth. Someone shouts coordinates. The Code Talker listens, converts, speaks in Navajo, hears the reply, converts it back. He is 20 years old, maybe younger, maybe older, but in that moment he carries the weight of an entire line. The words leave his mouth and travel through wire or radio. Not English, not Japanese, not a machine cipher. Dying words shaped by desert, sheep, wind, family, ceremony, and memory, now moving artillery and infantry on a volcanic island thousands of miles away. The war machine could build ships, planes, rifles, tanks, and bombs. But it could not manufacture that. It had to borrow it from the very people it had tried to change. When the war ended, many code talkers returned home quietly. The secrecy around their work meant that public recognition came late. Some lived for decades before the nation fully acknowledged what they had done. Congressional medals, ceremonies, museum exhibits, and official honors came long after the beaches, jungles, and foxholes. But the silence after war is not empty. It is full of everything not said. For Native veterans, returning home often meant returning to poverty, racism, limited opportunity, poor healthcare access, and communities still fighting federal policies. The uniform could earn respect in one room and discrimination in another. A man could be praised as a hero overseas and treated as an Indian problem at home. And no story captures that bitter return more painfully than Ira Hayes. Ira Hamilton Hayes was Acamel O'Odham, often known historically as Pima, from the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona. He was born in 1923, raised in a world of cotton fields, desert heat, reservation hardship, and family ties. He enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve in 1942 and became a para Marine before joining the forces that would fight on Iwo Jima. He was young, quiet, and by many accounts serious. He was not seeking fame. He was a Marine in a war that consumed young men by the thousands. On February 23, 1945, for days after the first landings on Iwo Jima, Marines raised a second American flag on Mount Suribachi. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment. 6 men straining together, bodies angled, flag rising into the wind. The image became one of the most famous photographs in American history. Ira Hayes was one of the men in that photograph. But here is what the photograph hides. It looks like victory. It looks like the end of something. It looks like a clean symbol: flag, sky, effort, unity. In reality, the battle was not over. Iwo Jima would continue for weeks. Men in the photograph and around it would die. The island would become one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. The flag went up, but the killing continued. That is the first tragedy of Ira Hayes. America saw a symbol while he was still inside slaughterhouse. 3 of the men identified in the famous flag-raising group would not survive the battle. Sergeant Michael Strank, Corporal Harlan Block, and Private First Class Franklin Sousley were killed on Iwo Jima. Hayes lived. Survival made him famous. It also made him lonely in a way fame could not repair. The government needed the photograph. The war still had to be funded. The image became central to the 7th War Loan Drive. The surviving flag raisers were pulled into public appearances, bond rallies, speeches, handshakes, staged admiration. Crowds cheered. Officials praised them. The country wanted heroes it could look at. Ira Hayes became one of those heroes. But he knew what the image cost. Imagine being asked to smile beneath a photograph that reminds you of dead friends. Imagine hearing applause for a moment that, in your memory, is surrounded by screams, shellfire, and bodies. Imagine America loving the version of you in bronze before it understands the living man standing in front of it. Hayes reportedly struggled with the attention. He did not see himself as the hero the public wanted. He had seen too many men die. The old language for what he carried did not exist in the public vocabulary. Today we might speak of post-traumatic stress. Then men spoke of nerves, combat fatigue, drinking, weakness, silence, trouble. Many veterans were expected to come home, be grateful, work, marry, and stop remembering out loud. But the body remembers. The nervous system remembers. The dead remember through the living. After the war, Hayes returned to a reservation world that had not been transformed by his fame. Poverty remained. Racism remained. The gap between national myth and native reality remained. He was invited to ceremonies and also arrested repeatedly for alcohol-related incidents. He moved between public honor and private collapse. The country could place his image on posters, but it could not give him peace. There's a famous line associated with Hayes, often paraphrased in the memory of his life. He said the real heroes were the men who did not come back. Whether spoken exactly in one moment or carried through multiple accounts, the truth of that sentiment defines him. He was haunted by survival. In January 1955, Ira Hayes died at the age of 32. He was found after a night of drinking, dead from exposure and alcohol poisoning. A man whose image had helped define American victory died young, cold, and broken. This is not an anti-American ending. It is an honest American ending. Because the story of Native Americans in World War II is not simply the story of a country redeemed by their service. It is the story of a country that needed them in war and still struggled to honor them in peace. It is the story of men who fought fascism abroad while facing discrimination at home. It is the story of languages once punished becoming unbreakable codes. It is the story of old warrior traditions surviving inside steel helmets, radio nets, landing craft, and foxholes. It is the story of Charles Chibity and the Comanche Code Talkers at Utah Beach, turning a tribal language into battlefield speed. It is the story of Charles Norman Shea, a Penobscot medic on Omaha Beach, entering the surf under fire to pull wounded men from death. It is the story of Joe Medicine Crow, wearing war paint beneath his uniform and becoming a Crow war chief in the middle of Nazi Germany. It is the story of Ernest Childers, moving uphill with a fractured foot against machine gun nests in Italy. It is the story of Navajo Marines sending messages no enemy could read while the Pacific burned around them. It is the story of Ira Hayes, lifted into legend by a photograph and then crushed by the weight of what the photograph could not show. The ancient and the modern did not meet gently in World War II. They collided, a sacred feather under a steel helmet, a prayer under artillery fire, a native language inside a Marine radio, a medic's hands in the tide at Omaha, a Crow honor song in Germany, a Pima Marine beneath a flag that became larger than his own life. And behind all of it, the question remains, why do they fight? They fought because identity is not erased by betrayal. They fought because defending home can mean defending a country that has not yet learned to defend you. They fought because warrior traditions do not require perfect governments. They require responsibility to the people, to the land, to the living, and to the dead. They fought for America. They fought despite America. They fought for nations older than America. And when they came home, the debt did not end. It still has not ended. So when we remember World War II, we cannot remember only the generals, the tanks, the aircraft carriers, the flags, and the maps. We have to remember the voices inside the radios, the medics in the water, the scouts in the snow, the men crawling through cornfields with broken bones, the Marines on volcanic ash, the veterans who came home carrying wars no parade could see. If this story changed the way you see World War II, share it with someone who thinks they already know the war. And before you leave, subscribe to America at Full Power, because the next story will go even deeper into the hidden battles, forgotten soldiers, and buried truths that shaped the United States at full force. The final image is not a monument. It is a shoreline. Omaha Beach, years after the guns have gone silent. The tide moves in and out as if history were simple. Wind crosses the sand. Visitors walk where men once drowned under fire. Somewhere in that wind, there is the echo of a medic calling back to the wounded. Somewhere far beyond it, in memory, a Comanche message moves through the static. A Crow song rises over stolen horses. Navajo words cross a Pacific island under shell fire. Ira Hayes stands beneath a flag and hears not applause, but the voices of men who did not come home. And for a moment, America is forced to see what it asked of its first warriors. Not just their service, their languages, their bodies, their memories. They're dead. The war ended in 1945, but the obligation to remember them did not.